Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. As the wife of Lucius and mother of Draco, Narcissa Malfoy holds a special, though outwardly modest, place in the Harry Potter story. Her image is that of a cold, blonde, aristocratic beauty hiding behind it a steely determination and absolute loyalty to her family. She is the complete opposite of her elder sister Bellatrix. Where Bellatrix is mad, flamboyant, explosive, Narcissa is reserved, calculating, almost icy. And though she tolerates her sister's outbursts for the sake of family, deep down she despises Bellatrix's cruel methods. Many quick to label Narcissa a villain would be quite surprised to discover just how many nuanced layers her character truly has. Today we will explore who Narcissa Malfoy really was. Enjoy watching. Number 1. A loving mother. No matter how outsiders judge her, Narcissa's love for her son Draco is undeniable. She was willing to do anything to ensure his safety. In the Battle of Hogwarts, she dared to lie to Voldemort, claiming Harry Potter was dead just to quickly find Draco and make sure he was alive. This moment is the pinnacle of her character. Few would dare to defy the Dark Lord right in his own camp. An interesting detail, Lucius initially wanted to send Draco to Durmstrang, but Narcissa insisted on Hogwarts so their son could stay closer to home. The irony of fate, Harry's life was saved by both Lily Potter's love for her child and Narcissa's love for Draco. Number 2. She is a skilled strategist. Narcissa thinks quickly and calculates ahead. By binding Severus Snape with the unbreakable vow, she forced him to protect Draco at all costs, cornering even such a cautious player as Snape. Her lie to Voldemort was another masterpiece of strategic thinking. It wasn't just a mother's impulse, it was a calculated move that ensured her family's safety in the future. Number 3. She kept her family out of Azkaban. After Voldemort's fall, most of his followers ended up in Azkaban, but not the Malfoys. Narcissa realized in time which way the scales were tipping, and at the decisive moment, she chose the side that guaranteed freedom for herself and her loved ones. After the battle, Lucius, following his wife's lead, provided evidence against former Death Eater associates, cutting the family's ties to the Dark Lord's supporters for good. Number 4. She was not a Death Eater. Although Lucius was one of the influential Death Eaters, Narcissa never officially joined their ranks. Yes, she shared the ideas of blood purity and aristocratic superiority, hosted gatherings at her home, and supported her husband. But no one ever saw her wearing the mask and the dark hood. J.K. Rowling has directly confirmed this fact. Number 5. Aunt to Nymphadora Tonks. Many know that Narcissa is the sister of Bellatrix Lestrange, but few remember that the sisters had another sibling, Andromeda. She went against the traditions of the Black family by marrying the Muggle-born Ted Tonks. From that marriage came Nymphadora Tonks, Aura, a member of the Order of the Phoenix. Technically, Narcissa was Tonks's aunt, but in truth they were strangers. Narcissa's beliefs did not allow her to accept her sister's choice, much less her marriage to the werewolf Remus Lupin. Number 6. The Face. Raised in the Black family, Narcissa absorbed their contempt for Muggles, Muggle-borns, and impure magical creatures. This even showed in her expressions, an arrogant grimace, as if she had dung under her nose. Hey, that's how she was described. Her beauty, cold, aristocratic, was shadowed by her arrogance, making her appearance both a weapon and a shield from outsiders. Number 7. A unique name. In the Black family, almost all children were named after stars or constellations. Narcissa is an exception. Her name refers to the myth of Narcissus, the youth in love with his own reflection, a fitting echo of her image and proud nature. Interestingly, she was the only Black-born with fully blonde hair. In the films, it was darkened to emphasize her resemblance to Bellatrix. Number 8. Cousin of Sirius Black. Narcissa Malfoy was born a Black, making her the cousin of Sirius and Regulus Black. The family tapestry in Order of the Phoenix shows their names connected by the same ancient bloodline, yet they could not have been more different. Sirius rejected the pure blood creed, calling his relatives mad and choosing exile in Grimmauld Place. Narcissa embraced the family's traditions, standing beside Lucius and keeping the Malfoy name tied to pure-blood politics. Their lives became proof that in the House of Black, blood was shared, but destiny was chosen. The irony is sharp in the moment when Harry learns about their connection. The pure-blood families are all interrelated, Sirius tells him, and the idea of Narcissa as family clearly disgusts him. For Narcissa, however, the connection to Sirius is barely worth acknowledgement. He had betrayed everything she considered proper. This divide between them is more than personal dislike. It's the visible split in the Black family's values, a reminder that heritage may shape you, but it is your choices that decide which side of the family's legacy you stand on. Number 9, Rosier Roots, and the Aristocratic Code. Narcissa's mother, Druella Rosier, came from a family whose name often surfaced alongside Voldemort's supporters. The Rosiers were old wizarding blood, steeped in tradition, and they carried themselves with the elegance of those who believed their status untouchable. For Narcissa, these roots were not just family history, they were the blueprint for how to exist in the wizarding world. She moved with precision, spoke with care, and maintained the appearance of dignity even in moments of chaos. Her life was governed by what could be called the aristocratic code: never lose composure, never let the mask slip. Unlike Bellatrix, whose devotion to Voldemort was near religious, Narcissa treated ideology as etiquette. She upheld blood purity not out of zeal, but because it was part of the rules her upbringing demanded. In The Half-Blood Prince, even when she visits Snape in desperation, she doesn't lose her manners. Her speech is formal, her posture controlled. This discipline was her armor, and it allowed her to navigate dangerous company without becoming a fanatic herself. For Narcissa, loyalty to the code was about survival, not worship. Number 10, not a duelist, but a negotiator. Narcissa Malfoy rarely raises her wand in the story, but she can change the course of events with a single sentence. In Malfoy Manor, when prisoners are brought in, she does not lash out like Bellatrix. She speaks carefully, choosing words that neither provoke Voldemort's wrath nor give away more than she intends. In the book, her voice is described as cold and quiet, the opposite of her sister's frenzied shouts. This calm allows her to keep the situation from spinning out of control, especially when Draco's safety is at stake. She understands that power is not always about force. While Bellatrix screams at the captives and demands answers, Narcissa uses hesitation as a shield. Every moment she delays is a moment for her son to avoid danger. When asked to confirm Harry's identity, she doesn't push Draco for a quick answer. She lets his uncertainty stand. That silence is a negotiation in itself. It keeps the decision open, keeps the risks from locking into place. In her world, shouting draws attention, and attention is deadly. Narcissa survives by knowing when to hold her tongue and when to let others speak themselves into trouble. It is this quiet diplomacy, rather than dueling skills, that protects her family more than once. She may not win battles on the field, but she wins them in the spaces between words where control is measured in seconds and lives are bought with pauses. Number 11, the unbreakable vow, betting on another's oath. The night she went to Severus Snape's home, Narcissa was not seeking comfort. She was sealing a contract. Voldemort had given Draco a task meant to punish Lucius, kill Albus Dumbledore. Narcissa knew it was a death sentence for her son. She arrived with Bellatrix, who mocked her fear, but Narcissa's focus never wavered. She turned to Snape, not to plead, but to bind him. The words in the book are sharp and deliberate. Will you, Severus, watch over my son, Draco, as he attempts to fulfill the Dark Lord's wishes? Snape hesitated. Bellatrix scoffed. Narcissa stepped closer, her voice low but unyielding. She proposed the unbreakable vow, an ancient magical oath that, if broken, would kill the one who swore it. "Will you, to the best of your ability, protect him from harm?" she pressed. The moment he agreed, the binding magic flared between their hands. This was not trust, it was strategy. She had turned Snape's vague assurances into a legal executioner's blade over his own head. The weight of that magic is what made the scene so dangerous. Narcissa knew that if Snape failed to protect Draco or complete the task himself, he would die. It was the only way to ensure her son's safety in a world where words meant nothing without force behind them. In this moment, she was playing a longer game than Bellatrix could see. While her sister laughed at loyalty and blood, Narcissa was quietly locking the most capable wizard she knew into her family's survival plan. This choice showed a kind of ruthlessness that set her apart from the other members of Voldemort's circle. She wasn't interested in the Dark Lord's cause. She wasn't even interested in Dumbledore's fate. She was willing to bind another's life to Draco's because she had accepted the truth no mother wants to face. Without drastic action, her son would not live through the year. The unbreakable vow was not desperation, it was calculated, cold protection. Number 12. After the war, family priority and grandson. The lie in the Forbidden Forest changed everything. When Narcissa told Voldemort that Harry was dead, she wasn't thinking about the war's outcome. She was thinking about Draco. That moment cut the Malfoys free from the sinking ship of the Dark Lord's cause. In the quiet years after the battle, they withdrew from politics, from ideology, and from the spotlight that had once defined them. For Narcissa, the center of the world became smaller, but safer. Draco's marriage to Astoria Greengrass was a quiet rebellion against the beliefs Narcissa once upheld. Astoria was gentle, and unlike many pure-blood wives, she had little interest in preserving bloodline purity at all costs. For some, this match might have seemed a betrayal of tradition, but for Narcissa it was a relief. Astoria offered Draco what no political alliance could: peace. Narcissa's acceptance of her daughter-in-law marked a shift that would have been unthinkable before the war. The birth of Scorpius Malfoy brought the transformation full circle. In Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, Draco speaks of the love his parents have for his son, describing how the Malfoy Manor became a place of shelter rather than a political headquarters. Narcissa, once the gatekeeper of status and reputation, became the quiet grandmother who guarded the boy from the darker parts of the world she had known too well. For her, Scorpius was a living reminder of why she had risked everything in that forest. Her life after the war wasn't about regaining influence or rewriting the past. It was about building something new on the ruins. The grand halls of Malfoy Manor no longer hosted Death Eaters or whispered councils. They became a sanctuary for a smaller, tighter circle. Narcissa had made her choice in a single whisper to Harry, and in Scorpius's laughter she saw the proof that it had been the right one. Number 13. Screen versus book. Nuances of her image. In the books, Narcissa Malfoy is described with almost icy precision, tall, slim, pale-skinned, with long, light blonde hair and a proud, aristocratic face. The most striking detail is that expression Rowling writes as though there's something foul smelling under her nose. It's not just about beauty, it's about a lifetime of looking down on those she considers beneath her. This image makes her intimidating without raising her voice, a figure who can silence a room with a glance. In the films, actress Helen McCrory brought another layer. The costume and makeup team gave Narcissa a stark black streak in her blonde hair. It made her look sharper, more severe, the contrast highlighting her elegance in a way the books never described. Her movements were precise. Her gaze lingered a second too long. She was eyes in motion, and yet not without purpose. The dark streak became a visual shorthand for her, rooted in the Black family's darkness, yet distinct from Bellatrix's wildness. What both versions preserved was her role as a mother first, aristocrat second. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, both book and film, the scene in the Forbidden Forest defines her. Voldemort demands she check if Harry is dead. She kneels, leans in and whispers, "Is Draco alive?" The question is not for the Dark Lord's victory, but for her son's safety. When Harry's quiet yes reaches her ears, she stands and lies to Voldemort. He is dead? That is not the act of a fanatic. It is the act of a mother breaking every oath for her child. The difference between page and screen is mostly in style, not substance. On paper, she is pure Black family pride, polished, pale, and untouchable. On screen, she carries that same cold dignity, but with a visual edge that makes her stand apart even in a room full of Death Eaters. In both, the truth is the same. Narcissa Malfoy is not a servant of Voldemort's cause. She is a servant of Draco's survival, and for that she will bend or break any rule in the wizarding world. Number 14, her role in the escape from Malfoy Manor. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione were dragged into Malfoy Manor as prisoners, the atmosphere was suffocating. Bellatrix Lestrange was practically vibrating with excitement, eager to prove her dominance. "Are you sure? Is it him?" she demanded, her voice high with anticipation. Yet in that moment, Narcissa Malfoy did not rush forward to identify Harry. She stood back, eyes cool, calculating. It was not kindness, it was survival. She knew that one wrong word could pull her entire family deeper into the chaos swirling around Voldemort's inner circle. Narcissa's restraint was deliberate. The manor was no longer her home in the true sense. It was a nest of snakes, and every snake had fangs aimed at someone's throat. Voldemort had claimed the grand drawing room as his own territory, and Bellatrix prowled through the halls like a predator. Narcissa understood that confirming Harry's identity on the spot would set off an uncontrollable chain of events. Her silence was a shield, not for the prisoners, but for her family's fragile position. The tension was visible in the way she moved. She stayed close to Lucius, her hand brushing his arm as though reminding him to hold back too. She did not contradict Bellatrix openly, but neither did she join the frenzy. Her pale eyes flicked to Draco, who stood rigid near the wall, avoiding direct contact with the prisoners. Narcissa's thoughts were not about justice or loyalty to the Dark Lord. They were about control. Every word spoken in that room could be the difference between staying in Voldemort's favor or becoming his next example. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the moment is quiet on the surface, yet loaded with meaning. "Is it Draco? Is it the boy?" Bellatrix presses. Narcissa watches her son hesitate. She does not push him to answer. That pause, that unwillingness to give Voldemort exactly what he wanted in that instant, was a small rebellion, not for Harry's sake, but for her own, and for the safety of the only two people she truly cared about. In a house full of death and loyalty oaths, silence was her most powerful weapon. Number 15, alliance with Lucius, more than a marriage of convenience. Lucius Malfoy was a man who prided himself on the Malfoy name, the ancient lineage, and the power it carried in wizarding society. His confidence was the kind that bordered on arrogance, the kind that could blind a man to the consequences of his own moves. Narcissa Malfoy, born a Black, understood the value of pride, but she also understood when pride had to be reined in. It was in this balance that their marriage found its unusual strength. To outsiders, they appeared to be the perfect example of an aristocratic arrangement, two pure blood families binding their power through marriage. Yet those who looked closer and who understood the undercurrents of influence in wizarding politics would have seen something more intricate. Narcissa was not a passive wife, nor merely a decorative figure beside her husband. She was his partner in every calculated step, quietly steering him away from disasters when his ambition burned too hot. One of the clearest moments revealing Narcissa's role came during the years when Lucius began to position himself closer to Voldemort's inner circle. Lucius, certain of his importance, believed that the Dark Lord's favor was secure. Narcissa, however, recognized that Voldemort's trust was an illusion, that favor could turn to punishment with terrifying speed. When Lucius orchestrated the plan to place Tom Riddle's diary into Ginny Weasley's possession, it was not just a reckless act, it was a gamble that risked their family's position if discovered. Narcissa's disapproval was not spoken openly in front of others, but within the privacy of Malfoy Manor, her anger was sharp. She understood that if the Ministry discovered any link to them, the Malfoy name could be dragged into scandal. The failure of that plot and the rescue of Ginny was a humiliation Lucius had to bear in public. Narcissa bore it differently. She moved swiftly to limit the damage, tightening her network of connections to ensure no suspicion reached Draco. It was not love in the conventional sense that bound them, but the precision of shared survival. Narcissa knew that Lucius's strengths, his charisma, his political reach, were valuable assets, but she also knew his weaknesses. His arrogance, his tendency to underestimate others, his hunger to be seen as indispensable to those in power. These were dangerous flaws in volatile times. She played the role of the quiet strategist, smoothing over rifts that Lucius's words or actions created. When the Ministry began its tighter scrutiny after Voldemort's return, Narcissa maintained the facade of a respectable family untouched by dark dealings, even as the walls of suspicion closed in. She hosted dinners for influential witches and wizards, keeping old alliances warm, ensuring that if Lucius stumbled, there would be those willing to shield them. This pattern repeated itself after the catastrophic events at the Department of Mysteries, when Lucius's imprisonment in Azkaban threatened to destroy the Malfoy influence entirely. Most wives in such a position might have retreated into quiet disgrace, but Narcissa moved in the opposite direction. She kept the household running with an iron grip, ensuring Draco's schooling continued uninterrupted, projecting the image of strength even as whispers about Lucius's failure filled the corridors of power. Her actions ensured that when Lucius was released, the family had not lost all standing. In this way, she acted as both protector and strategist, understanding that reputations in their world could be rebuilt if one did not panic. Narcissa's most revealing quality was her ability to read the shifting currents of power. When Voldemort's wrath fell on Lucius after the failure to retrieve the prophecy, she saw clearly that her husband was no longer in the Dark Lord's favor. Lucius, humiliated and desperate to regain standing, might have made reckless moves to prove his loyalty again. It was Narcissa who prevented him from doing so, steering the family into a lower, quieter profile that kept them from further disgrace. In private, she made the decisions that Lucius could not. She limited visitors to the manor, controlled what information passed through their household, and even managed Draco's interactions with other influential families. It was a careful containment strategy, one that ensured the Malfoy name did not sink further. The greatest evidence of Narcissa's role as a partner came during the events surrounding Draco's mission to kill Albus Dumbledore. This was not Lucius's plan. It was Voldemort's punishment disguised as a task. Lucius, still broken from his fall from favor, could do nothing to protect their son. It was Narcissa who took the desperate step of visiting Severus Snape, demanding the unbreakable vow to ensure Draco's safety. Her actions were not in defiance of Lucius, but in compensation for his inability to act. She knew he could not confront Voldemort without sealing his own death, and so she acted alone, but always with the knowledge that she was guarding the Ball family's survival. In this moment, she was more than a wife, she was the family's shield. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Narcissa's plea to Snape is filled with urgency. He's just a boy. You promised to look after him. It is not merely the voice of a mother. It is the voice of a strategist who knows the stakes. Lucius, humiliated and silent in Azkaban, could not intervene. Narcissa made the move that kept their son alive and, indirectly, kept the Malfoy line intact. Her understanding of alliances, knowing exactly whom to trust and when, was sharper than her husband's political instincts at that point. Snape was not just an old acquaintance, he was an asset who could be bound by magic to their cause. Number 16. In the Shadow of Bellatrix. Narcissa Malfoy's life was shaped in the shadow of someone whose presence could fill a room with a single glance, her older sister, Bellatrix Black. Bellatrix was the embodiment of their family's ideals, fiercely loyal to pure-blood supremacy, unapologetically cruel, and unflinchingly devoted to the Dark Lord. For Narcissa, who grew up in the same grand and stifling Black family home, this meant her own personality had to find refuge in subtler corners. Where Bellatrix thrived on chaos and confrontation, Narcissa learned the quiet art of influence. From an early age, she understood that in a household dominated by her sister's blazing ferocity, there was little room for competing flames. Instead, she cultivated the image of composure, elegance, and calculation, a survival strategy born not of weakness, but of necessity. In the Black family's drawing room, with its heavy velvet curtains and ancestral portraits whispering judgment from their frames, Bellatrix would hold court. Relatives leaned in, eager for her sharp laughter and cutting remarks. Narcissa sat beside her, outwardly calm, inwardly measuring each word, each expression, storing away knowledge. Even their parents, Druella and Cygnus, seemed bewitched by Bellatrix's defiance. It was not merely approval, they admired the spectacle she created, the way she mirrored the family's dogma so openly. Narcissa, however, discovered that attention could be a double-edged sword. To be constantly seen was to be constantly targeted. Better, she realized, to stand just outside the spotlight and pull strings from there. At Hogwarts, this dynamic played out with ruthless clarity. Bellatrix had already blazed a trail through Slytherin House by the time Narcissa arrived. Teachers remembered her for her brilliance and her temper. Students remembered her for the way she could make or break reputations. Narcissa knew she could never match the force of that reputation, so she didn't try. Instead, she built her own sphere of influence, quieter, more exclusive, less dangerous-looking. She befriended those who could be useful, learned how to make her preferences known without ever raising her voice, and practiced the subtle manipulations that would become her hallmark. If Bellatrix was a storm, Narcissa was the still cold air that followed, dangerous in its own way. There was one evening during the summer holidays when this unspoken balance became painfully clear. Bellatrix had just returned from a gathering, what she called a meeting, but everyone understood to be the earliest stirrings of her alliance with the Dark Lord. She was animated, speaking of cleansing and loyalty, her dark eyes glittering. Narcissa sat in silence, her hands folded in her lap, observing her parents' approving nods. No one asked Narcissa's opinion, and she offered none. Yet later that night, in the quiet of her room, she considered what she had heard. Bellatrix's passion was intoxicating, but it left no room for caution. Narcissa could already see the dangers it invited. She vowed then that her own life would not be ruled by reckless devotion. This vow did not mean a rejection of her family's values, rather it meant she would uphold them differently. Where Bellatrix shouted, Narcissa whispered. When Bellatrix took oaths in blood, Narcissa traded in promises sealed by implication. The contrast between them was so striking that even outsiders noticed. Sirius Black, their cousin, would later remark in bitterness how Bellatrix was born to destroy, while Narcissa seemed born to preserve. It was true in a way. Narcissa's role was not to lead the charge, but to ensure that after the dust settled, her position remained secure. Marriage to Lucius Malfoy only strengthened this approach. Lucius was a man who understood the value of appearances, and Narcissa proved an ideal partner in that regard. Together they presented the image of aristocratic perfection, their home at Malfoy Manor a place where decorum ruled even as darker schemes unfolded behind closed doors. Bellatrix, by contrast, became increasingly unhinged in her service to Voldemort. Narcissa watched her sister's descent with a mixture of loyalty and quiet alarm. She knew Bellatrix's recklessness would one day put them all at risk. This difference between them became starkly visible during the events of Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. When Draco was tasked with killing Dumbledore, Narcissa did not seek to rally armies or make grand declarations. Instead, she went to Severus Snape, asking him to protect her son. The moment was laden with quiet desperation, but also with the strategic mind she had honed all her life. She told him, "If Draco fails, Voldemort will kill him. You know he will." This was not the voice of a fanatic. It was the voice of a mother who understood the stakes and sought the most discreet, effective way to change them. Bellatrix stood beside her during this scene, mocking and scorning the idea of fear. Narcissa did not rise to the bait. She had never needed to. It is telling that Narcissa's defining moment in the entire series came not in battle, but in a whisper to Harry Potter on the battlefield at Hogwarts. Voldemort demanded to know if Harry was dead, and Narcissa bent over him, pretending to check. Her true purpose was to ask a single, quiet question. Is Draco alive? Is he in the castle? When Harry confirmed it, she lied to the Dark Lord and declared Harry dead. This single act, born of loyalty to her family above all else, shifted the course of the battle. Bellatrix, had she been in that position, would never have considered deception against Voldemort. Narcissa, however, saw an opening and took it. Number 17. Master of Emotional Control. Narcissa, Malfoy's presence in the Harry Potter saga, is quiet yet commanding, a paradox of understated strength. Unlike her husband Lucius, whose emotions often flare in arrogance or panic, or her sister, Bellatrix Lestrange, who is consumed by wild fanaticism, Narcissa moves through the chaos of the Second Wizarding War with an unshakable composure. Her ability to keep her emotions tightly leashed is not born out of coldness, but from a calculated understanding of survival. The truest measure of her mastery over emotional control emerges in the Forbidden Forest during the final confrontation, when Voldemort believes he has killed Harry Potter. In that tense, breathless moment, Narcissa is summoned to verify his death, and it is there that her entire character's complexity unfolds. When she kneels beside Harry's seemingly lifeless body, the air is thick with Voldemort's triumph and the fearful anticipation of his followers. Her face betrays no panic, no hesitation. She does not tremble in awe of the Dark Lord, nor does she rush to embrace his victory. The narrative tells us that she leans close, her voice low, her manner still and unassuming. This composure allows her to do what no one else in Voldemort's service could have done: quietly subvert his will. Harry lies there, holding himself still, and Narcissa whispers her only question, whether Draco is alive. Her mind is entirely focused, not on Voldemort's glory, not on the war's politics, but on her son. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the text reads, "Is Draco alive? Is he in the castle?" This is not the voice of a Death Eater. It is the voice of a mother who has mastered the art of masking her true intentions. What makes this moment so extraordinary is the way Narcissa cloaks her real emotions beneath a layer of apparent obedience. Voldemort watches her closely, expecting loyalty and reverence. The Death Eaters surrounding them are eager for her confirmation of Harry's death, yet she gives them exactly what they want to hear, while pursuing her own private agenda. When Harry quietly answers that Draco is safe, Narcissa does not betray the relief that must have flooded her. She does not gasp, does not glance at Voldemort to seek permission, does not smile. She simply stands and declares, "He is dead." In that moment, her voice is steady, her face unreadable. This is emotional control as a weapon, the kind that disarms opponents without a single spell cast. It is easy to overlook the magnitude of this act because Narcissa does not wield a wand or engage in the flashy heroics of others. Her victory is one of restraint. Many characters in the series, from Harry to Snape to Dumbledore, engage in emotional performances to conceal their motives. Yet Narcissa's performance is unique in its intimacy and precision. She is surrounded by enemies and allies alike, all of whom would destroy her without hesitation if she appeared to betray the cause. But she turns that pressure into a shield, allowing no hint of her true purpose to escape. Emotional control in her hands becomes a survival skill as potent as any protective enchantment. This mastery is not an isolated event, but a consistent trait throughout the series. We see it in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince when she visits Snape's home to secure the unbreakable vow. Bellatrix spits venom and mocks her for seeking help, yet Narcissa remains calm. She does not retaliate or let Bellatrix's hysteria derail her goal. Instead, she channels her fear and desperation into a controlled plea, convincing Snape to protect Draco without revealing the full depth of her anxiety. This ability to control her outward behavior, even when driven by maternal fear, allows her to navigate dangerous alliances without becoming a victim of them. The contrast with her sister Bellatrix could not be more striking. Bellatrix thrives on chaos, her emotions spilling over into violence and cruelty, making her unpredictable but also reckless. Narcissa, by comparison, is deliberate. She understands that in the political and magical climate under Voldemort's reign, a single display of misplaced emotion could mean death. This understanding turns her into one of the few people who can stand in Voldemort's presence without shrinking or losing focus. Her survival and the survival of her family depend on this discipline. In the Forbidden Forest scene, her emotional control becomes not just a shield, but a dagger hidden in plain sight. Voldemort expects loyalty, but she offers him something far more dangerous, compliance that conceals defiance. It is important to note that she does not free Harry out of allegiance to him or the cause he represents. Her motivation is entirely personal, driven by a mother's instinct to reunite with her child. Yet it is precisely this personal motivation, hidden beneath the mask of obedience, that allows her to manipulate the moment to her advantage. The skill lies not just in suppressing fear, but in using that suppression to project exactly what her enemy wants to see. The quote, "Is Draco alive?" lingers as a testament to her priorities. In that moment, the fate of the wizarding world hangs in the balance, but her world narrows to the safety of her son. This tunnel vision, combined with her ability to hide it from Voldemort, ensures that she makes the right calculation. Emotional control in this instance is not a denial of feeling, but a mastery over its expression. She feels everything: fear, love, desperation, but she chooses which parts of herself the world is allowed to see. Number 18, the symbolism of her name in her fate. Narcissa Malfoy's name carries the weight of myth long before her first appearance in the Harry Potter series. Drawn from the Greek legend of Narcissus, the youth who fell in love with his own reflection, her name immediately evokes images of vanity and self-absorption. Yet in her case, the reflection she admires is not merely her own beauty, but the gleaming, polished image of her family. The Malfoy name, the unbroken lineage of pure-blood wizardry, the perfection of the world she was raised to protect. She lives inside a frame, like a portrait preserved in silver and glass, and every choice she makes seems to be about keeping the glass unbroken. But as the story unfolds, the reader witnesses the truth behind the reflection. Glass can crack, mirrors can distort, and even Narcissa must face the moment when the perfect image collapses. When Harry first encounters Narcissa in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, her demeanor is cold, poised, and calculated. Tall, slim, and blonde, Rowling describes her, with a cold, proud face and the same pale, pointed features as Draco. The resemblance to her son underscores the inherited nature of her ideals. He is her mirror in youth, the continuation of her family's prestige. This reflects the core of the Narcissus myth. The object of affection is not necessarily oneself, but the perfect image one believes embodies beauty and worth. For Narcissa, Draco's safety is inseparable from her. Vision of family honor. When this image is threatened, the perfection she values becomes her deepest vulnerability. In mythology, Narcissus is cursed to fall in love with something he can never truly possess, an image on the surface of water. Narcissa Malfoy's water is the calm facade of the Malfoy family, the way they are seen by others in the wizarding world. Her social position, her status as the wife of Lucius Malfoy, and her place in the pure-blood hierarchy are all part of this surface. Yet, like ripples disturbing a reflection, the events of the Second Wizarding War shake her carefully maintained reality. Lucius's fall from grace, the imprisonment in Azkaban, and the constant threat of Voldemort's displeasure create cracks in the image. Still, she continues to act as if the reflection is intact, because to admit otherwise would mean stepping into the cold, unfamiliar waters of a world without that certainty. The moment where this symbolic reflection begins to shatter is not loud or dramatic, but it is decisive. In Half-Blood Prince, she breaks the rules of her own proud isolation and seeks help from Severus Snape. Her visit to Spinner's End is an act of quiet desperation, cloaked in the pretense of control. Narcissa is not there to gossip or to socialize. She is there because Draco has been given a task that could kill him. In the myth of Narcissus, the obsession leads to destruction because the lover cannot turn away from the reflection. For Narcissa, the danger is in realizing that the reflection, which is the life she has built, will vanish if her son is lost. And this is the first sign that her devotion is not to the mirror itself, but to what it holds within it. Rowling subtly aligns her with the themes of the myth through her physical descriptions and mannerisms. Narcissa is often described in terms of elegance and cold beauty, a kind of untouchable refinement. This echoes Narcissus's own unapproachable allure. Other characters, like Bellatrix Lestrange, burn with fire and chaos, but Narcissa's strength is in stillness, the stillness of water before a stone breaks the surface. The tension in her storyline comes from the inevitability of that stone being thrown. She tries to protect Draco from the currents beneath that surface, but the tide of war is beyond her control. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the mirror is shattered completely. By the time the Battle of Hogwarts begins, Narcissa has endured public humiliation, the collapse of her husband's influence, and the constant proximity to a master who views her family as pawns. When Voldemort sends her to check if Harry is dead, she bends over him not as a loyal Death Eater, but as a mother desperate for truth about her son. Her whispered question, "Is Draco alive? Is he in the castle?" marks the point where the myth reverses itself. Narcissa turns away from the reflection entirely. In that moment, the image of the perfect Malfoy family in the eyes of others ceases to matter. The only truth she seeks is the survival of her child. The symbolism deepens here because the myth of Narcissus is traditionally a cautionary tale about self-love leading to ruin. Narcissa's arc transforms it into something more complex. She does not perish staring into the reflection. She breaks it deliberately when it no longer serves what she truly loves. The facade of loyalty to Voldemort, the polished surface of social standing, all of it is sacrificed in one silent act of rebellion. By lying to the Dark Lord and declaring Harry dead, she ensures the chance to search for Draco. In a story filled with explosive acts of defiance, hers is quiet and surgical, but it changes the course of the war. The act is more powerful because it is done without expectation of glory. Narcissa is not there to be hailed as a hero. She moves through the chaos of the final battle like someone walking through broken glass, careful, and focused only on reaching the one piece that matters. The reader can almost feel the finality of the moment when she walks away from Voldemort's ranks. In that choice, she does not save the Malfoy name, she abandons it as a weapon in the hands of others. What she saves is Draco, and by extension, the part of herself that existed before the reflection became a prison. The connection to the myth also lies in the theme of awakening. Narcissus dies when he realizes the reflection is only an illusion. Narcissa survives precisely because she accepts that her perfect world is an illusion, and then she chooses life beyond it. Her beauty, her pride, her cold demeanor all remain, but the reader understands that the foundation beneath them has shifted. She is no longer just the image in the mirror, she is the hand that can turn it away. Rowling's narrative makes this transformation believable because it is built from consistent threads. Early descriptions of Narcissa in Half-Blood Prince present her as a figure who speaks little but observes everything. Her decision to involve Snape in Draco's fate is already a step outside her closed circle. By the time she faces Harry in the forest, those small steps have prepared the reader to believe she could act against Voldemort. The transition is not sudden, it is the slow realization that the reflection has been clouded all along. Even her relationship with Bellatrix plays into the symbolism. Bellatrix is unshakably devoted to Voldemort, as if his image is her own reflection. Narcissa, though outwardly similar in pride, treats Voldemort with the politeness of necessity rather than the fervor of worship. The difference becomes crucial when the illusion of Voldemort's invincibility begins to crumble. Bellatrix doubles down on her loyalty, fighting to the death. Narcissa, in contrast, redirects her loyalty entirely toward Draco, demonstrating that her narcissism was never pure vanity, but a protective shell around what she valued most. The careful use of her name by Rowling makes the connection to the myth unavoidable yet open to reinterpretation. The reader is invited to consider whether Narcissa is trapped by her own ideals or simply using them as armor. The Narcissus myth ends in tragedy because the character cannot change. Narcissa's story, however, shows change as a survival strategy. She leaves the battlefield alive with Draco and Lucius at her side, not because they have triumphed in the traditional sense, but because she has rejected the reflection in favor of the living person it represented. Her arc also reframes the idea of beauty as both a shield and a prison. In the world of pure-blood politics, beauty and poise are tools for maintaining influence. Narcissa uses them expertly, but they also isolate her, much like the image of Narcissus alone at the pool. By the end, when the mirror shatters, she walks through the world, no less elegant, but no longer bound to the approval of those who once admired her reflection. It is a quiet liberation, and perhaps one of the most understated yet profound shifts in the series. Through Narcissa Malfoy, Rowling takes a name steeped in myth and bends its meaning to fit a different truth. The reflection she guards so fiercely is not herself but the life of her son. The destruction of her idealized world does not destroy her, it forces her to redefine it. In doing so, she subverts the fate of her mythological namesake, turning the cautionary tale of self-obsession into a story about the power of love to break even the strongest illusions. In the end, Narcissa survives because she dares to look away from the mirror. Number 19. Relationship with Draco after the war. After the war, when the echoes of Voldemort's defeat still lingered like smoke over the ruins of the wizarding world, Narcissa Malfoy's life became a study in deliberate withdrawal. She had already shown the world that her loyalty to her family outweighed loyalty to any cause, even the Dark Lord's. Her single act of defiance, lying to Voldemort about Harry's death in the Forbidden Forest, had been the pivot on which history turned. But the public did not see a savior. They saw a Malfoy forever tied to the dark banners of the past. In that fragile, shifting landscape, Narcissa fixed her gaze on only one thing: her son. Draco, pale and tight-lipped at his trial, had been spared Azkaban largely because of her relentless maneuvering behind the scenes. It was in the small details that her protection showed. Narcissa did not simply stand by Draco's side during the Ministry's inquiries. She controlled the environment around him. She made sure the family solicitor, Cassius Greengrass, was always present, ensuring no stray words could be twisted into confession or accusation. She refused all invitations to high society gatherings, even those from families who had once courted Malfoy influence. If an owl came from a former Death Eater associate, she intercepted it before Draco could read it. Her presence was a shield, one that kept him insulated not only from the political storms but from the bitter gossip that travelled through every corridor of Diagon Alley. The wizarding press was eager to paint Draco as an unwilling hero redeemed by circumstance, or as an unrepentant coward who escaped justice by privilege. Narcissa would not allow either narrative to dictate his life. She quietly declined an interview request from the Daily Prophet, knowing that one careless line could undo everything. She had seen how reputations were shredded in a single headline. Her decision meant that for months the Malfoy name was absent from public discourse. To some, it was proof of guilt. To her, it was protection. Draco's absence became a kind of statement in itself, a refusal to play the game of public rehabilitation. This choice to live quietly was not simply about evasion, it was about survival. Narcissa knew the cost of remaining in the political centre. The war had stripped away the illusions of control that pure-blood names once offered. The Ministry was different now, its leadership rebuilt with the intent to dismantle the very hierarchies her family had once stood upon. Remaining visible would have meant constant scrutiny, subtle punishments, and the quiet closing of doors. Narcissa, pragmatic to her core, chose obscurity for Draco over prominence for the family. It was a decision that would shape the rest of their lives. In the years immediately following the war, Malfoy Manor became almost monastic in its seclusion. The grand drawing room that had once hosted elaborate gatherings now sat silent, its crystal chandelier reflecting only the muted light of Wiltshire's cloudy skies. The gardens, once meticulously pruned for show, grew slightly wilder, less touched by outside eyes. Narcissa maintained the house, not as a place of power, but as a sanctuary. It was here that Draco spent his days, sometimes wandering the long hallways in thought, sometimes immersed in restoring sections of the family library. One of the few times Draco ventured beyond this cloistered life was to attend the wedding of his former classmate Astoria Greengrass. Narcissa's approval of this union was quiet but unmistakable. Astoria came from a family untouched by the inner circle of the Death Eaters, and her reputation was one of grace and kindness rather than scandal. Narcissa saw in her a bridge, a way for Draco to have a life without the weight of his past crushing every step. "He is his own man now," Narcissa told a trusted family friend in a rare moment of openness, echoing the same fierce independence she had once shown when she defied Voldemort in the forest. There were whispers, of course, from those who remembered Draco's sneer in the Great Hall or his reluctant role in identifying prisoners at Malfoy Manor. Yet these voices were muted by time and the simple fact that Draco no longer moved in circles where such accusations could sting. Narcissa made certain of it. She declined all ministry banquets, all social events tied to the new order. Instead, she encouraged her son to focus on private pursuits, breeding rare potions ingredients in the Manor's greenhouses, corresponding discreetly with former Hogwarts classmates who had shown him kindness in the past. Her influence did not erase Draco's scars, but it gave him space to heal in ways few others from the war could. The nightmares that once kept him pacing at night became less frequent. The tension in his voice when discussing the war slowly faded, replaced by a quiet reserve that some mistook for arrogance, but which was, in truth, self-preservation. In those years, Narcissa became both mother and strategist, balancing the tender instincts of family with the cold calculus of survival. It is telling that when Harry Potter himself crossed paths with Draco at King's Cross Station years later, the moment was one of mutual acknowledgement, not hostility. The tension of their youth had burned away, leaving only the understanding of two men who had survived the same storm from different sides. Narcissa had laid the foundation for that possibility by steering Draco away from the bitterness that might have consumed him. Her role was invisible to outsiders, yet decisive. One specific incident, rarely spoken of outside the family, illustrates just how far Narcissa went to protect her son from the political consequences of his past. In the second year after the war, an anonymous tip reached the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, suggesting that Draco had been in possession of a cursed artifact from the Malfoy collection. The ministry sent an investigator, none other than Hermione Granger, now working in the department, to question him. Before the meeting could take place, Narcissa removed the item in question from the Manor and arranged for it to be anonymously surrendered to the ministry's artifact containment vaults. Draco was never officially implicated, and the incident disappeared into bureaucratic obscurity. This act was not about hiding guilt. The artifact was an heirloom long predating Voldemort's rise, untouched and unused in the war. But Narcissa understood how the mere association with dark magic could be enough to destroy what little ground Draco had regained. Her preemptive action prevented a fresh wave of suspicion and allowed Draco's quiet life to continue undisturbed. It was a precise, almost surgical intervention, the kind she had perfected over decades of navigating dangerous political currents. Her relationship with Draco after the war was marked by an unspoken contract. She would guard the perimeter, and he would rebuild himself within it. This arrangement required a level of trust between them that had not always existed when Lucius's shadow loomed large over the family. Freed from the rigid demands of her husband's politics, Narcissa could shape a future for her son based on her own instincts rather than the expectations of their peers. In many ways, the war had made her more formidable, not less. The Malfoys' retreat from public life did not mean complete isolation. On rare occasions, Narcissa allowed Draco to reconnect with those who might offer him a future untainted by the past. She invited Theodore Nott for discreet visits, knowing his own complicated history could serve as a quiet reminder that survival often required reinvention. These meetings, though infrequent, reminded Draco that he was not alone in navigating the shadows left by the war. Even in this withdrawn existence, Narcissa never lost her sense of the world's shifting tides. She read the Daily Prophet daily, marking articles with a quill for Draco to see, pieces about ministry reforms, the trial of former Death Eaters, the growing influence of new political figures. She did not push him to engage, but she ensured he remained aware. In her view, ignorance was as dangerous as exposure. Her approach was subtle education, preparing him for a time when he might need to step forward again, not as the boy who had once served a dark master, but as a man who had learned the value of caution. It is easy to overlook how fragile that balance was. One wrong move, an overheard remark, an ill-advised friendship, an artifact left in the wrong drawer, could have undone years of quiet restoration. Narcissa's vigilance was the thread holding it all together. The war had taught her that survival was not only about winning battles, but about avoiding them entirely when the cost was too high. Draco's ability to live a life far removed from the chaos of the past was no accident. It was the result of her deliberate, often unseen choices made day after day in the long shadow of the war. In the end, Narcissa's post-war years were defined by a single, unwavering mission to ensure that her son could walk through the wizarding world without the weight of his surname crushing him. It was not a quest for redemption in the eyes of others, nor an attempt to rewrite history. It was a mother's decision to give her child the one thing she had learned to value above all else, peace, bought not with grand gestures or public victories, but with quiet, relentless protection. Draco's life after the war was shaped in the stillness she created, a stillness that, in its own way, was as powerful as any spell. Number 20. Subtle diplomacy in the wizarding community. Narcissa Malfoy's presence in the wizarding world was never one of loud proclamations or public duels. Her power lay in the spaces between words, in the way her gaze could suggest an alliance without a contract or a warning without a threat. Even when the name Malfoy became a whisper spoken with suspicion, she understood that survival was not always about winning battles. It was about remaining untouchable. There was an art to existing in the drawing rooms of the elite, while the ministry's eye shifted uneasily in your direction. Narcissa mastered this art with the same precision that others reserved for dueling spells. She did not raise her wand in public conflicts. She raised her eyebrow at the right moment, and that was enough. Her reputation for diplomacy was born not from compromise, but from control. Narcissa never begged for acceptance when the Malfoys' loyalties were questioned after the fall of Voldemort. Instead, she used what she already possessed, an address book of powerful acquaintances cultivated through years of carefully hosted dinners and subtle gestures of assistance. She understood that influence was not gained in the great hall of the Wizengamot, but in the soft glow of candlelight over an exclusive supper where confidences could be exchanged for promises. Many remembered that she had once been a Black, sister to Bellatrix Lestrange and Andromeda Tonks, which placed her in the heart of two very different spheres of influence. Even after those relationships fractured, the echoes of her lineage were doors she could still open. There was a moment, not long after the war, when the Malfoys' standing could have crumbled entirely. Lucius's trial loomed, and public sentiment had shifted violently against any known Death Eater. The ministry was eager to set examples, yet the Malfoy estate remained untouched, their assets intact. This was not an accident. While Lucius sat in hearings, Narcissa was paying social calls, sending rare gifts to the right households, and ensuring that certain members of the Wizengamot were reminded of past occasions when Malfoy gold had quietly smoothed a difficult path. It was never a bribe, not in the crude sense, merely an acknowledgement of mutual benefit. By the time the vote came to strip the Malfoys of their ancestral home, the measure failed by a narrow margin. Her ability to avoid open conflict was as deliberate as it was strategic. Narcissa knew that engaging in direct disputes after the war would only invite scrutiny. Instead, she became a master of the oblique remark. When asked at a ministry event about her family's role in the war, she would tilt her head slightly and respond, "We have all lost someone." The words were true but evasive, offering no admission of guilt, yet leaving little room for further questioning. It was the same skill she had displayed in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows when, standing before Voldemort, she concealed her knowledge of Harry's survival. "Is Draco alive? Is he in the castle?" she had asked. The line was direct, but the meaning was layered. She extracted what she needed without revealing her own betrayal of the Dark Lord. One particular example stands as a testament to her subtlety. In the year after the war, the Parkinson family, longtime allies of the Malfoys, faced the possibility of losing their seat on the Hogwarts Board of Governors due to their daughter Pansy's public call to hand Harry Potter over to Voldemort. It was Narcissa who arranged a quiet luncheon with Augusta Longbottom, whose influence over school affairs was considerable. Over tea, she did not defend Pansy directly. Instead, she reminisced about the importance of unity in post-war Hogwarts and how our children must be allowed to grow beyond our mistakes. The next week, the board's decision to remove the Parkinsons was reversed. Narcissa never mentioned it publicly, but the Parkinsons would not forget. Her methods relied heavily on reciprocal favors. She would lend the Malfoy name to an event if it served to elevate an ally's standing, knowing that such social currency could later be redeemed in times of need. It was not manipulation in her eyes, it was the architecture of survival. When the Shafiq family, one of the Sacred 28, faced an unfounded accusation of dark magic possession, Narcissa was among the first to attend their charity gala, bringing with her half of the social elite. In return, the Shafiqs became a quiet but loyal shield for the Malfoys in financial circles, ensuring their investments remained unchallenged. There was a cold elegance to her approach. Narcissa never apologized for her family's past, yet she did not flaunt it either. She moved in such a way that the Malfoys were still seen at the right places, St. Mungo's charity banquets, the Quidditch World Cup receptions, but never in the front row where photographers might scrutinize them too closely. The message was clear: they were still part of the upper tier, but not seeking to dominate it. This positioning allowed her to rebuild connections without appearing desperate for acceptance. Her tact also extended to the press. Rita Skeeter, ever eager for sensational headlines, once approached her for an interview on the truth about the Malfoys after the war. Narcissa declined politely, sending instead a handwritten note praising Skeeter's recent biography of Gwenog Jones, complete with a limited edition quill as a gift. When Skeeter's article eventually ran, it cast the Malfoys in a surprisingly neutral light, focusing on their charitable donations rather than their wartime associations. Narcissa's hand was invisible in the final piece, but the effect was unmistakable. What made her skill so formidable was her capacity to read a room. At post-war gatherings, tensions ran high between families on opposing sides of the conflict. Narcissa would glide between conversations, never lingering too long, never aligning herself openly with any faction. She could offer condolences to the family of a fallen Auror, and minutes later share a quiet word with the widow of a former Death Eater. Each interaction was brief, but left behind a sense of acknowledgement, as though she had extended a small piece of dignity to those who felt unseen. Her relationship with her son also played into her diplomatic strategy. Draco's reintegration into wizarding society was a delicate process. Narcissa ensured that he was invited to events where he could be seen in the company of respected young witches and wizards, Theodore Nott, who had distanced himself from his father's politics, and Astoria Greengrass, whose family maintained a reputation for discretion. These introductions were not casual, they were carefully orchestrated. By aligning Draco with individuals whose reputations were intact, Narcissa slowly reshaped public perception of the Malfoy heir. Even within her own home, she maintained an air of calculated hospitality. Visitors to Malfoy Manor after the war found it transformed, not in its grandeur, which remained untouched, but in its atmosphere. The darker artifacts were removed from public display, replaced with pieces of neutral elegance. The effect was subtle yet powerful. It suggested that the Malfoys had turned a page without ever declaring it outright. Guests left with the impression that they had visited a household committed to refinement rather than rebellion. In the eyes of some, her tactics were a form of manipulation. In the eyes of others, they were a necessary evolution. The truth was likely somewhere in between. Narcissa understood that the wizarding world was as much about perception as it was about power. The war had changed the rules, but influence still mattered, and she was determined to ensure her family retained it. Her methods required patience. There were no instant victories, only gradual shifts in the way the Malfoy name was spoken. It is telling that by the time her grandson Scorpius was old enough to attend Hogwarts, the whispers that once surrounded the Malfoy name had dulled to a distant murmur. This was not because the past had been forgotten, but because Narcissa had ensured it was reframed. In private circles, some still remembered the accusations, but they also remembered the discreet help she had provided during difficult times. For many, that balance was enough. Her approach was not without risk. Each subtle maneuver carried the danger of misinterpretation, and one poorly chosen alliance could have reignited the hostility toward her family. Yet Narcissa navigated these waters with a steadiness that few could match. She had learned, perhaps from the example of her sister Bellatrix's downfall, that open aggression was a path to ruin. Caution and elegance, however, could reshape destiny. Narcissa's diplomacy was a quiet form of magic. No incantations, no flashes of light, just the invisible weaving of trust, obligation, and memory. In a world still healing from division, she found a way to secure the Malfoys' place without ever drawing her wand. Her legacy was not one of heroism or redemption in the conventional sense, but of endurance. Through the careful cultivation of relationships, she ensured that her family's name, though altered, remained firmly etched into the upper echelons of wizarding society. It was survival not by force, but by the slow, deliberate art of influence. Number 21. Skepticism toward Voldemort's fanaticism. Narcissa Malfoy's position within Voldemort's inner circle was unlike that of her sister Bellatrix Lestrange, whose devotion bordered on religious worship. Narcissa had been raised in a pure-blood family steeped in tradition, and she understood the political games of the wizarding world. To her, Voldemort was a powerful ally when his cause aligned with the preservation of her family's status. Yet she was not blinded by the intoxicating fanaticism that consumed so many Death Eaters. In her private thoughts, far from the eyes of the Dark Lord and his loyalists, she regarded him as dangerously unstable, a man whose obsession with domination left no room for loyalty or mercy. She could watch Bellatrix glow at the mere mention of Voldemort's name, and yet feel only a cold wariness, aware that such devotion was little more than an invitation to destruction. The difference between Narcissa and Bellatrix became glaring during the war. Bellatrix threw herself into every mission with manic delight, seeing Voldemort as a messiah who would cleanse the wizarding world of impurity. Narcissa, however, measured every order against the safety of her husband Lucius and her son Draco. When Voldemort took up residence in Malfoy Manor in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Narcissa's home became a fortress for a tyrant. Bellatrix welcomed his presence as an honor, but Narcissa saw the danger. The longer Voldemort stayed, the more her family's fate was tied to his whims. It was no accident that her gaze often flickered to Draco, calculating risks, quietly assessing how close they were to losing everything. Her skepticism was not born of courage but of pragmatism. Narcissa understood that Voldemort's war was not winnable in the way he imagined. His disregard for human cost, even among his own followers, meant that allegiance to him was ultimately a death sentence. When Lucius fell from grace after the failure at the Department of Mysteries, Voldemort did not forgive. Instead, he humiliated him, taking his wand and forcing the Malfoys into servitude without dignity. Narcissa watched this happen, standing silently as her family's status crumbled. In that silence was a truth. Her loyalty to Voldemort was not to him, but to survival, and survival sometimes meant enduring the presence of a man she neither respected nor trusted. One of the most telling moments came in the Forbidden Forest, moments before the final battle. Voldemort had just used the killing curse on Harry Potter, and he ordered Narcissa to confirm whether Harry was truly dead. She bent over him, her long, pale hair brushing his face, and in that moment her question was not about the Dark Lord's triumph, but about her son's safety. "Is Draco alive? Is he in the castle?" she whispered. When Harry confirmed that Draco was safe, she lied to Voldemort, declaring Harry dead. This act was a betrayal in every sense, and it was not for the sake of the boy lying before her, nor for the downfall of the tyrant standing behind her. It was for Draco, and Draco alone. In that moment, her skepticism toward Voldemort's cause became action. Her distrust had been growing for years. Narcissa had been present at meetings where Voldemort's temper flared over perceived disloyalty, where even his most faithful could be punished without warning. She saw it when Severus Snape was summoned and questioned, when lesser Death Eaters disappeared and never returned. The unpredictability was worse than cruelty, it was instability. Narcissa had been raised in the Black family, where cunning and control were prized. She recognized in Voldemort's impulsive rages the traits of a man who would eventually destroy even those closest to him. Bellatrix might have interpreted such actions as divine justice. Narcissa saw only the dangerous whims of a leader who could turn on her family in an instant. When Draco was assigned the task of killing Albus Dumbledore in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Narcissa's skepticism became desperation. She went to Severus Snape, pleading with him to protect her son, binding him to the unbreakable vow. This was an extraordinary act for a Death Eater's wife. It showed that she did not believe Voldemort's mission to be worth her son's life. If she had trusted in the Dark Lord's wisdom, she would have trusted in the necessity of Draco's assignment. Instead, she maneuvered behind Voldemort's back to safeguard Draco, defying the spirit of his command without openly breaking it. There was also the matter of her marriage. Lucius Malfoy, once confident and untouchable, withered under Voldemort's punishments. He lost not only his position, but his confidence, becoming a shadow of the aristocrat he had been. Narcissa bore witness to this degradation. For all her outward composure, she saw the transformation for what it was, a warning. Voldemort did not elevate his followers, he consumed them. To a woman who valued family above all else, this was proof that his reign was poison. She did not voice these thoughts, doing so would have been suicide, but the knowledge shaped her every decision. The tragedy for Narcissa was that she could never reveal her skepticism. Within the Death Eater ranks, doubt was the surest path to execution. She maintained the mask of loyalty, allowing Bellatrix to interpret her silence as agreement. Yet when Bellatrix mocked others for hesitation, Narcissa remained still, her thoughts elsewhere. This dual existence, public loyalty, private distrust, was her survival strategy. It required a constant suppression of emotion, a steady calculation of risks, and an unshakable focus on her family's preservation. What makes her stance remarkable is how it contrasts with the blind zealotry that surrounded Voldemort. Bellatrix and other Death Eaters saw themselves as soldiers in a sacred war. Narcissa was a realist, understanding that the chaos Voldemort created would spare no one, not even those who bore his mark. In many ways, she resembled Severus Snape, whose allegiance was likewise complex and layered with self-interest. Yet while Snape's hidden loyalty was to Dumbledore and Lily Potter's memory, Narcissa's was to the Malfoy name and the blood that carried it. The war pushed Narcissa into moments where her skepticism became quiet defiance. In the final hours of the Battle of Hogwarts, when the tide began to turn against Voldemort, she did not fight to protect him. She stayed close to Draco, moving through the chaos with one goal: to reunite her family and leave the battlefield alive. When Voldemort fell, she did not mourn. Her survival, and Draco's, was the only victory she had ever truly sought. This was the clearest proof that her loyalty had always been conditional. The quote from Deathly Hallows, "Is Draco alive? Is he in the castle?" crystallizes everything about her true priorities. In that moment, Voldemort's supposed triumph over Harry Potter meant nothing to her. The war itself meant nothing. All that mattered was the boy she had raised. In the entire saga of the Second Wizarding War, no single sentence exposes the limits of Death Eater loyalty as starkly as that one. It is a mother's voice, stripped of ideology, stripped of politics, utterly human in the middle of inhuman conflict. Her skepticism also illuminates a larger truth about Voldemort's downfall. His inability to inspire genuine loyalty from those closest to him meant that when the war reached its final act, betrayals came from within. Narcissa's lie in the Forbidden Forest, combined with Snape's long-standing duplicity, showed that even those in his inner circle harbored doubts. In Voldemort's world, love and family were weaknesses. For Narcissa, they were everything. That irreconcilable difference meant that eventually her path would diverge from his, even if it took until the last possible moment for her to act. The irony is that Narcissa never considered herself a rebel. She did not plot Voldemort's downfall or secretly aid the Order of the Phoenix. She simply refused to sacrifice her family to a cause she knew was spiraling into madness. Her caution, her silences, her small acts of self-preservation, they all spoke to a woman who understood the truth long before the final battle. Voldemort's war was not about building a new world for pure blood families. It was about feeding his own obsession, and obsession destroys all. In the end, Narcissa Malfoy walked away from the ruins of the war with her son and husband alive. She had not fought for Harry nor for the freedom of the wizarding world, but in lying to Voldemort, she had played a decisive role in ending his reign. Her skepticism had never been an open rebellion, but it had guided her to the one act that mattered most. For all her quiet calculation and her careful masks, the choice she made in the forest was the ultimate proof that she had never truly been Voldemort. She had been, first and last, a Malfoy. Number 22, hatred for Harry and gratitude. Narcissa. Malfoy's feelings toward Harry Potter were always laced with contempt, sharpened by years of family loyalty and Slytherin pride. From the moment she first truly took his measure in the chaos of the Department of Mysteries, her eyes carried the weight of that Malfoy disdain. An unspoken verdict that he was an interloper in the affairs of the old pure-blood families. To her, Harry was not just a boy. He was the personification of everything that threatened her family's safety and standing in Voldemort's rising world. Her loyalty was never to the Dark Lord's ideology in the way Bellatrix embraced it. It was to her husband Lucius, and above all, her son Draco. And Harry, in Narcissa's mind, endangered all of them. This contempt was not a petty whim, but a defense mechanism. The Malfoys had spent years curating an image, elegance, influence, and old magic coursing through their veins. And Harry represented the crack in that facade. He had humiliated Lucius at the Ministry, weakened their position in Voldemort's court, and brought disgrace upon their name through nothing more than his survival. When the events of Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince unfolded, and Draco was forced into the impossible task of killing Dumbledore, Harry became, by association, a reminder of the web of danger closing in on her only child. In the Malfoy home at Malfoy Manor, where Voldemort himself held court, her icy glances toward Harry during their brief encounters were the distilled essence of that fear and loathing. Yet there was another layer to her attitude, one that even she might not have acknowledged in the moment. Narcissa was, above all, a mother. Her world revolved around Draco's well-being. When she saw Harry, she did not just see a boy who defied Voldemort. She saw a boy who continually risked his life for others, a boy who seemed to emerge, bloodied but breathing, from every ordeal. That same reckless courage was, in her mind, the kind of force Draco would never choose for himself, yet it was the kind of shield she might one day hope her son could stand behind. It was a paradox. Harry was both a threat and, in some distant corner of her mind, a potential protector. The breaking point came in the Forbidden Forest. Voldemort, after finally striking Harry down with the killing curse, called on Narcissa to confirm whether the boy was dead. In that moment, surrounded by Death Eaters and the dark stillness of the trees, she was no longer a pure-blood aristocrat or a servant of the Dark Lord's cause. She was a mother desperate for news of her child. "Is Draco alive? Is he in the castle?" she asked Harry, leaning close enough that only he could hear. His whispered yes cut through the chaos of her fears. She knew then that the boy lying before her had not only faced death, he had, in that instant, chosen to give her what she needed most, the truth about her son. It is in this moment that the entire dynamic shifted. Narcissa lied to Voldemort, telling him Harry was dead, securing the opportunity for the Dark Lord to march toward Hogwarts believing victory was his. The lie was not born of loyalty to Harry, nor was it an act of rebellion against Voldemort in the political sense. It was a calculated move to get to Draco. But hidden in that calculation was the seed of a strange, silent gratitude. Harry had given her hope in the darkest possible moment, and in return she had given him, and the wizarding world, the chance to live. This exchange between them, brief as it was, carried more weight than 100 duels. When Narcissa walked through the battlefield later, calling for Draco amid the fighting, she was also walking in the shadow of that unspoken pact. Harry's survival after Voldemort's curse and her own choice to protect that secret created a bond neither would speak of, but both would understand. It was not friendship. It was not even alliance. It was something rarer. Mutual acknowledgement born in the heart of war. The books leave no room for flowery exchanges between them afterward, but it is telling that in the aftermath of the Battle of Hogwarts the Malfoys withdrew quietly from the centre of magical society. They did not boast of past allegiances, nor did they seek vengeance for the Dark Lord's fall. Narcissa, standing beside her family during the final scene, was a woman who had learned the cost of blind loyalty. In Harry's victory, she saw not only the end of Voldemort but also the beginning of a fragile freedom for her family. What makes her later attitude toward Harry so fascinating is the way it remained veiled. There was no public admission, no outward change in demeanor. If they crossed paths, one could imagine her offering him a cool nod, the barest acknowledgement of his existence. And yet, beneath that practiced composure, she carried the knowledge that without him, Draco might not have survived. She would never thank him aloud. It was not in her nature, nor in the Malfoy way, but silence does not always mean absence of feeling. This silent gratitude is one of the subtler triumphs of J.K. Rowling's storytelling. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the moment is quick, overshadowed by the roar of battle, but its emotional weight lingers. Is Draco alive? Is he in the castle? Is not merely a mother's question. It is the point where the entire story pivots. If Harry had lied, if he had withheld the truth, perhaps Narcissa would have made another choice. But he told her exactly what she needed to hear, and that truth was powerful enough to end her loyalty to Voldemort in that instant. The irony is sharp. For years, she had despised him for surviving, for defying Voldemort, for making her family's life more precarious with each passing term at Hogwarts. And yet, in the end, it was precisely his survival, in the Forbidden Forest in that moment where their fates intersected, that allowed her family to step away from the abyss. Harry's existence, once a curse in her eyes, became the reason she could hope for a life beyond the Dark Lord's shadow. From Harry's perspective, there was no conscious act of saving Narcissa or Draco that night. He was focused on the larger battle, on the desperate hope of defeating Voldemort once and for all. Yet his simple honesty in that forest moment shaped the outcome for more than just himself. It is a reminder that sometimes the smallest choices in a war, the truth spoken in a whisper, the lie told in public, can tip the scales for entire families. Narcissa's later life, quiet and scandal-free, was built on the foundation of that choice. For Draco, too, the shift in his mother's perception of Harry must have been complex. He had grown up in the shadow of that disdain, taught to see Harry as an enemy. But after the battle, when his family's safety was intact and the Malfoys were spared the fate of other Death Eaters, he could not ignore the truth of who had ultimately made that possible. Narcissa's gratitude, though unspoken, would have been felt most strongly at home, where the family could acknowledge debts in private without sacrificing pride. In the tapestry of the Harry Potter series, Narcissa Malfoy's arc is one of the most understated yet profoundly human. She never abandons her family. She never undergoes a moral awakening in the way characters like Snape are revealed to have done. Instead, she remains steadfast in her priorities from beginning to end. And it is those priorities that create the paradox of her relationship with Harry. Hatred gave way to necessity. Necessity gave way to gratitude, and gratitude, though hidden, endured. That final image of Narcissa walking across the debris-strewn grounds of Hogwarts with Draco and Lucius at her side is the visual proof of what that moment in the Forbidden Forest achieved. The war was over, the old allegiances broken, but her family was alive. And somewhere in that carefully guarded Malfoy heart was the acknowledgement that Harry Potter, the boy she had despised for years, had played a part in that survival. She would never embrace him as a friend, never speak his name with warmth. But she would remember. Always. Number 23, personal tragedy, the loss of her sister. During the final chaos of the Battle of Hogwarts, the moment Bellatrix Lestrange fell under Molly Weasley's curse marked an irreversible shift in Narcissa Malfoy's world. It was not the kind of grief that roared like a storm. It was colder, deeper, a silent ache that wrapped itself around her heart. Narcissa had spent years quietly maintaining a fragile distance from her elder sister's fanatical violence, yet they had shared a bond that blood alone could not erase. When Bellatrix's body fell beside the shattered remains of the Great Hall's floor, something in Narcissa shifted forever. She had been trained all her life to hide emotion, but the image seared itself into her memory, not because Bellatrix was a saint, she was far from it, but because she had been family, the last piece of a childhood that had already been scattered by war. For Narcissa, Bellatrix was not simply the infamous Death Eater feared by all, she was also the girl who once sat beside her in the Black family drawing room, braiding the hair of their younger cousin Andromeda before everything fell apart. In the dark corners of her mind, Narcissa could still recall the way Bellatrix's laughter used to sound before it hardened into a cruel, high-pitched shriek. That laughter had become rare as Bellatrix descended further into Lord Voldemort's inner circle, and by the time the Second Wizarding War began, it had vanished entirely. Yet even knowing the monster her sister had become, the fact of her death left a hollow space that no victory or peace could fill. Narcissa had been in the courtyard when she saw the dueling shapes in the distance, Molly Weasley's determined stance against Bellatrix's fluid, vicious movements. It was a fight unlike any other that night, not because of the skill, but because of the fury. The explosion of light that ended it seemed to happen both instantly and in slow motion. Narcissa's eyes had locked on the scene, and she knew, long before the echo faded, that Bellatrix's life had ended. There was no cry, no outward sign of mourning in that moment. Years of Malfoy self-control held her frozen, but her heart clenched, and she could not stop the truth from settling like lead. Bellatrix was gone. It was strange for her in the months that followed to live without the constant presence of Bellatrix's influence. For all her life, Bellatrix had been a force, sometimes a shield, often a threat, always a presence. She had defended the family name with the same ferocity she destroyed others' lives. Narcissa had disagreed with her methods, feared her unpredictability, and even distanced Draco from her influence when possible. Yet she had also relied on her sister's strength in moments when their family's position was most fragile. Losing that figure left Narcissa feeling more exposed than she cared to admit. She refused to romanticize Bellatrix after death. Many in the pure blood community whispered about her tragic bravery, but Narcissa knew better. Bellatrix had been destructive in every possible sense, driven not by loyalty to family but by obsession with Voldemort. Narcissa remembered the look in her sister's eyes the night at Malfoy Manor when Harry Potter was dragged inside, the way Bellatrix's voice had risen to a fever pitch of cruelty. Those moments were not erased simply because she had died on the battlefield. Narcissa understood that grief did not require erasing flaws. It required facing the truth and accepting the loss anyway. Her memories of Bellatrix were fractured like shards of a broken mirror. In one fragment, they were young girls in matching green dresses at a Black family gathering. In another, Bellatrix was screaming at Andromeda for marrying a Muggle-born, her fury breaking the last thread between the sisters. In yet another, she was standing beside Voldemort, eyes alight with a devotion Narcissa could never understand. That last image had haunted Narcissa for years. Bellatrix's love for the Dark Lord had consumed her, burning away anything human that remained. Even so, when the war ended, Narcissa could not help but think of how it might have been different if Bellatrix had chosen another path. In the days after the battle, the Malfoy estate became a place of uneasy quiet. Lucius retreated into his study, drowning his thoughts in endless decanters of fire whiskey. Draco, pale and restless, avoided speaking of the war entirely. Narcissa, however, carried her grief privately, almost in secret. No one came to offer condolences. Few dared mention Bellatrix's name. It was as though the world had collectively decided that her death required no mourning. Narcissa knew better than to expect sympathy. Her sister had earned her enemies. But the silence was its own wound. She found herself walking alone in the gardens, thinking about a line she had overheard during the battle. Molly Weasley's voice, shaking but fierce, shouting, "Not my daughter, you bitch!" before the final spell struck. It was not the insult that stayed with Narcissa, but the raw, unflinching love behind it. Bellatrix had died facing an enemy who fought for family, something she had long abandoned herself. Narcissa could not help but wonder if, in those final seconds, her sister understood that truth. The loss deepened Narcissa's already guarded nature. Those who had known her before the war noticed the change. She was colder, quieter, her trust in people even thinner than before. The events at Hogwarts had shown her that power, bloodline, and old alliances meant nothing when the tide turned. She had watched her sister's ferocity lead her to a sudden and final end, and she had no intention of following that path. Instead, she devoted herself to protecting what remained, her son, her home, and the fragile fragments of dignity left to her family. There was one evening, months after the war, when Narcissa opened a drawer in her study and found an old photograph. It showed her and Bellatrix as teenagers, standing side by side at a family picnic, their hair catching the sunlight. For a long time, she simply stared at it, tracing the edges with her fingers. She did not cry. She rarely did. Instead, she placed the photograph back in the drawer and closed it with care. She did not keep it out in the open. It was not a memory she wanted on display. It was enough to know it was there, a reminder of what once was and could never be again. Narcissa's grief was complicated, wrapped in layers of memory, resentment, and loyalty. Bellatrix had been a danger to nearly everyone she encountered, yet she had been fiercely protective of the Malfoy name. She had stood with them in moments of political ruin, even if her presence brought its own peril. Narcissa could not forgive the harm her sister had done, but neither could she erase the shared blood and history. In the end, Bellatrix's death was both a relief and a sorrow, a paradox that Narcissa carried quietly. The emptiness left by her sister's absence made the post-war world feel colder. The gatherings of old pure-blood families became smaller, quieter, stripped of the energy Bellatrix had brought, however dangerous that energy had been. There were no more sharp bursts of laughter from across the room, no sudden, reckless pronouncements that left everyone on edge. Narcissa found she did not miss the chaos, but she did miss the sense that her sister was an unmovable part of her life. She sometimes recalled the words from the book that marked Bellatrix's end. Molly's curse soared beneath Bellatrix's outstretched arm and hit her squarely in the chest, directly over her heart. It was an image she could not erase, not because it was violent, but because it was final. Bellatrix had always seemed unstoppable, and in one flash of light she was simply gone. The certainty of that moment, its permanence, was perhaps the hardest truth to accept. As the years passed, Narcissa spoke less and less of her sister. When Draco asked about the Black family history, she would mention Bellatrix only briefly, describing her as formidable and fierce, but leaving out the darker truths unless pressed. She did not want Draco to inherit his aunt's fervour for the wrong causes, nor did she want him to dismiss the cautionary tale her life represented. Bellatrix's legacy was not one of honour or victory, but of devotion misplaced so completely that it consumed everything else. Still in the privacy of her thoughts, Narcissa sometimes imagined a different end. She wondered what might have happened if Bellatrix had survived the battle, if the two of them could have sat in some quiet place far from the war and spoken honestly for the first time in years. She wondered if her sister would have been capable of remorse, or if she would have laughed at the idea. The answers never came, and perhaps that was why the loss lingered so heavily. It was not just the absence of a person, but the absence of any chance for resolution. In the end, Narcissa carried her sister's memory the way she carried the scars of the war, hidden beneath layers of poise and silence, but always there. Bellatrix had been destructive, dangerous, and unyielding, yet she had been her sister. And no matter how far she had fallen into darkness, that truth could never be erased. Number 24, strict mistress of Malfoy Manor. The polished marble floors of Malfoy Manor gleamed like frozen moonlight, their cold, perfect surfaces reflecting the grandeur of the chandelier that hung above the great entrance hall. Narcissa Malfoy's touch was everywhere, from the perfectly aligned family portraits to the antique vases imported from France, each filled with fresh flowers even in the darkest years of the Second Wizarding War. It was not simply wealth that gave the manor its immaculate beauty, it was vigilance. Narcissa understood that the house was more than a place to live. It was the physical embodiment of the Malfoy name. Letting it fall into neglect would mean letting the family's influence crumble. Even as war crept through every corner of the wizarding world, Malfoy Manor stood untouched, a silent declaration of its owner's unyielding status. During those turbulent years, the manor became more than a home. It transformed into a headquarters, a fortress, and a stage for the darkest of gatherings. The Death Eaters assembled under its high, painted ceilings, their black robes pooling on the pristine floors. Yet not a single curtain was out of place, not a single piece of silverware tarnished. Narcissa ensured that even in the presence of Lord Voldemort himself, the house reflected the dignity of its lineage. The air inside carried the faint scent of polished wood and the delicate trace of enchanted lilies from the gardens. She may have bowed her head to the Dark Lord, but she never allowed the Malfoy household to bow to disorder. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the Malfoy Manor is described as a magnificent manor house set amidst rolling lawns and manicured gardens, its beauty stark against the fear and tension of the times. Those manicured gardens were not a product of chance. Narcissa directed the estate's caretakers personally, ensuring that the lawns were cut to the precise length and that the topiary animals, sculpted in the likeness of mythical creatures, stood flawlessly trimmed. This control over the smallest details was not vanity, it was strategy. Every guest, ally, or enemy was reminded upon arrival that the Malfoys were untouchable, their wealth and refinement unscathed by war. One striking example came on the night when the captured Harry Potter was brought to the manor. The room in which the prisoners were held, though cold and unwelcoming, was spotless. Even the iron bars on the windows were clean, their black sheen contrasting sharply with the pale walls. Narcissa moved through the house like a shadow, ensuring that the chaos of the outside world did not seep into its foundations. The sense of control she maintained was almost unnatural, order imposed on a world collapsing into madness. It was in those moments that her nature as the true mistress of the manor became undeniable. The long dining table, where Voldemort once stood at its head, was polished to a mirror finish. Ancient silver goblets gleamed in the candlelight, and the dark, high-backed chairs were positioned with exact symmetry. While others at the table whispered of raids and murders, Narcissa's eyes would sweep the room, noting the placement of every dish, the flicker of each candle. Even the food served during these grim feasts was presented with elegance. It was a long, polished table, with a gilded chair at its head, the book tells us, and one can imagine how carefully Narcissa maintained that image, even when dread hung over every gathering. Her commitment to the manor extended beyond the interiors. The white peacocks that roamed the grounds were not merely ornamental, they were living emblems of the family's grandeur. These birds, often glimpsed by outsiders as a sign of opulence, were also symbols of vigilance, always on display, always watching. Narcissa ensured they remained healthy and majestic, their feathers pristine, despite the dark omens surrounding the estate. Their presence at the gates was a subtle warning. Beauty here was guarded, and so was power. The war brought whispers of betrayal and ruin to many pure-blood families, but within the Malfoy estate, the illusion of stability never wavered. Even when Lucius Malfoy's fall from favour became evident, Narcissa's command over the manor's appearance shielded them from complete humiliation. The furniture remained immaculate, the crystal clean, and the tapestries depicting ancestral victories still hung proudly in the corridors. These details worked like silent armour. The house was both a sanctuary and a statement that the Malfoys, for all their troubles, still belonged to an elite beyond reach. Her influence extended to the very atmosphere of the manor. Guests, willingly or otherwise, entered a place where every candle was positioned for optimal light, every shadow cast deliberately to highlight the wealth of the surroundings. Even the echo of footsteps across the marble seemed carefully measured, as if the house itself knew it was being watched. When Bellatrix Lestrange roamed the halls, wild and untamed, Narcissa's steadiness was the counterpoint, the hostess who could tolerate the presence of chaos without letting it stain the walls. Perhaps the most telling example of Narcissa's mastery came during Voldemort's stay at the manor. While others lived in terror of displeasing him, she ensured that every space he occupied met the highest standards. There were no traces of dust, no creaks in the floorboards, and the air remained free of the dampness and neglect that wartime often brought to grand homes. The Dark Lord's presence was a threat to her family's survival, but the manor remained the same, coldly beautiful, meticulously ordered. Narcissa understood that the house itself had to reflect unbroken strength, even as the family within trembled. Her care for the manor was also care for its legacy. Every polished banister and gleaming chandelier was a piece of history passed down through generations. She guarded these with a devotion that equaled her protection of Draco. In some ways, the manor was her second child, one she nurtured and preserved, knowing that its grandeur would speak for the Malfoy name long after current dangers had faded. This belief in the house as a living emblem of status was not misplaced. Even enemies of the Malfoys acknowledged the intimidating beauty of their home. When prisoners were dragged through its doors, they were met not just with fear of their captors, but with the disorienting contrast of elegance and menace. It was a calculated psychological weapon. The grandeur of the surroundings made their captivity feel more surreal, more hopeless. Narcissa, though not directly involved in the cruelty, ensured that this effect remained sharp. The manor's order and refinement were not disrupted by blood on the floor or the muffled cries of captives. Instead, such horrors stood out more vividly against the backdrop of perfection. Even after the war ended and the Dark Lord fell, the manor retained its dignity. The scars of conflict might have touched the hearts of its inhabitants, but the house itself bore no outward sign of defeat. This was Narcissa's triumph. While others rebuilt from rubble, she maintained an unbroken image, as if the war had been a passing storm that left the Malfoy estate untouched. To those who visited in the years that followed, the manor still whispered of power, old magic, and the unwavering pride of its mistress. Narcissa's guardianship of Malfoy Manor was not a trivial obsession with appearance. It was a form of resistance against the decay that war brings. In a time when alliances shifted and fortunes fell overnight, the manor's constancy was a rare and potent symbol. Every gleam of polished wood, every perfectly hung drape, was a quiet assertion that some things remained beyond the reach of chaos. This was her battlefield, and she fought with dusters and polish as fiercely as others fought with wands. The role of strict mistress suited her not because she relished control for its own sake, but because she understood the psychological and political value of her home. In a world where perception could be as lethal as any curse, Malfoy Manor's image was a weapon in its own right. Narcissa wielded it with precision, ensuring that the house reflected the same qualities she wished others to see in the Malfoy family: wealth, resilience, and a refusal to bow to disorder, no matter how dark the times became. Number 25. Silent Observer East. Narcissa Malfoy is one of those rare characters who rarely steps into the spotlight, yet her presence in the Harry Potter saga is quietly powerful. She is not the loudest voice in the room, nor the most aggressive player in the dangerous game of alliances during the Second Wizarding War. Instead, she occupies the background, watching, calculating, and storing information that others overlook. Her pale face and cold poise hide a sharp mind that notices everything, who leans closer in conversation, whose eyes flicker with fear, whose loyalty wavers when no one is looking. In a world where information can mean the difference between survival and ruin, this quality makes her both dangerous and invaluable. From the very first time readers meet her in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, Narcissa is not introduced with the flamboyance of her sister Bellatrix Lestrange or the arrogance of her husband Lucius Malfoy. Her role appears almost ornamental, a silent figure beside her family. But beneath that polished exterior lies a woman who knows exactly when to speak and when to remain silent. In gatherings of Death Eaters, she says little, but her eyes are always moving, always taking in the undercurrents of tension between allies who pretend unity. She notices when the Carrows exchange uneasy glances, when Severus Snape's answers to Voldemort are precise but carefully measured, when her own husband's confidence falters after each of the Dark Lord's punishments. The moment that reveals her observational power most vividly comes in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows in the chaos of the Battle of Hogwarts. After Voldemort appears to have killed Harry in the Forbidden Forest, he sends Narcissa to confirm it. She kneels beside Harry's seemingly lifeless body, but instead of blindly following the Dark Lord's orders, she seizes the moment to ask him, in a voice too soft for anyone else to hear, "Is Draco alive? Is he in the castle?" When Harry whispers yes, she makes her decision instantly. She rises and announces to Voldemort and his followers, he is dead. This is not merely maternal instinct, it is the move of a woman who has assessed the battlefield, understood the shifting balance of power, and chosen survival over blind loyalty. What makes this moment so telling is that Narcissa has been silently gathering the information needed to make such a choice for years. She knows that Voldemort's rule is built on fear, and that his followers are loyal only while it serves their interests. She has seen enough betrayals to understand that the Dark Lord himself would sacrifice any of them without hesitation. Her understanding of these unspoken truths is what gives her the confidence to lie to his face, knowing that in that split second her word would carry the battle forward in his favor, while secretly delivering victory to Harry. Narcissa's skill as a silent observer also comes from her family position. As the wife of Lucius Malfoy, she is present at gatherings where crucial conversations unfold, yet she is never the central figure. That gives her the advantage of being underestimated. Voldemort's attention is on warriors like Bellatrix, on strategists like Snape, on pawns like the Malfoy men, rarely on Narcissa. And so she listens, committing every detail to memory. the grudges that fester between allies, the hesitation in answering the Dark Lord, the subtle moments when someone flinches under his gaze. In Half-Blood Prince, readers see another example of this subtlety when Narcissa visits Snape with Bellatrix. Her desperation to protect Draco drives her to seek an unbreakable vow, but what stands out is the way she frames her request. She reveals that she already knows more about Voldemort's plans than she should. "The Dark Lord has ordered Draco to do a job," she says, stopping herself before speaking too openly. She knows exactly how much to say and how much to leave unsaid, forcing Snape to fill in the gaps while gauging his willingness to commit. Even here, in her fear, she is strategic, using partial truths and measured words to secure an ally. It is this ability to read people, to notice small fractures in their loyalty, that makes her dangerous. A woman who listens more than she speaks can be a threat to anyone with secrets, especially in an environment like Voldemort's inner circle. She would know who hesitates before agreeing to a command, who shifts blame when plans fail, who praises Voldemort too eagerly in an attempt to mask doubt. Her power lies not in open confrontation, but in the ability to recall these details and use them at a moment when they can turn the tide. Her quiet nature is often mistaken for passivity, but that illusion is precisely why she is so effective. The other Death Eaters are often caught in displays of power, duels, taunts, public declarations of loyalty. Narcissa's influence moves in the opposite direction, hidden beneath the surface until it matters most. Her decision in the Forbidden Forest is not an isolated act of courage. It is the culmination of years of watching, learning, and understanding the unspoken rules that dictate survival in the shadow of the Dark Lord. Even her relationship with her sisters shows this difference in approach. Bellatrix is consumed by fanatical devotion, unable to question Voldemort's decisions. Andromeda chooses exile and disownment for her beliefs. Narcissa walks the dangerous line between them, publicly loyal, privately pragmatic. This duality allows her to protect her family while remaining inside the circle of influence. She can smile at Voldemort's victories while silently calculating what those victories cost and to whom. Another revealing detail comes during the Malfoy family's downfall. After Lucius loses favor and Voldemort uses their home as his base in Deathly Hallows, the tension is palpable. Narcissa sees firsthand the contempt Voldemort shows her husband, the way Bellatrix takes control of the household. She notices that the more Lucius grovels, the less safe they are. By the time she meets Harry in the forest, she has already concluded that her family's future depends on breaking from the Dark Lord. Her lie to Voldemort is therefore not an impulsive betrayal, but the final move in a plan that has been forming silently for months. Her power as a witness also lies in the trust she extends sparingly. For those who earn it, like Draco and, in a brief calculated moment, Harry, her loyalty is fierce. But that loyalty is conditional, given only when she sees clear benefit or shared survival. This is what makes her such a reliable ally for those few who gain her confidence. When she tells Harry that Draco is safe, she is binding him into her unspoken bargain. She will give him life now, and in return, her son's safety will be secured when the battle ends. The way J.K. Rowling writes Narcissa emphasizes this quiet force. She rarely appears in action-heavy scenes. Instead, her moments are intimate, loaded with unspoken stakes. The reader is left to imagine all the things she notices but never says aloud. Her lie in the Forbidden Forest is one of the most pivotal in the series, yet it passes in a heartbeat, unaccompanied by fanfare. It is a testament to how much power a single sentence can have when spoken by someone who has been silently preparing for the right moment. Her silence also protects her from the fates of more outspoken characters. Many of Voldemort's followers die because they overplay their hand, underestimate their enemies, or push their luck in seeking his favor. Narcissa survives because she does none of these. She understands that in volatile times, survival belongs not only to the strongest fighters, but to those who can see the truth beneath the surface and adapt without warning. She is neither a hero nor a villain in the traditional sense. She is a survivor, shaped by her love for her family and her understanding of human weakness. This makes her role in the saga unique. In a series dominated by characters whose strengths are worn openly, Harry's courage, Hermione's intellect, Voldemort's ambition, Narcissa's strength is hidden in plain sight. She proves that influence can be exercised without power spells, without public defiance, without loud declarations. It can come from the quiet collection of truths, the steady gaze that misses nothing, the careful choice of when to speak and when to stay silent. Even after the war, one imagines that Narcissa would carry these habits forward. In any gathering, she would still notice who avoids whose eyes, whose hands tremble as they raise a glass, who leaves early with a thin excuse. She has lived too long in a world where these details mean survival to ever stop watching. And in that sense, the silent observer remains still dangerous, still valuable, still the kind of ally whose trust, once earned, is worth far more than public promises. Number 26. Contrast with her husband. Lucius Malfoy was a man of sharp words, impeccable robes, and a presence that commanded attention in any gathering. But beneath the polished veneer and the calculated sneer was a flaw that often dictated his actions, his impulsiveness, when pride or ambition was at stake. In contrast, Narcissa Malfoy, with her poised demeanor and unshakable calm, embodied a different kind of power. While her husband's strategies were driven by the heat of the moment, hers were crafted in the cool silence of long reflection. This difference between them was not a source of conflict, but rather a balance that often determined whether the Malfoy family merely stumbled or fell entirely in the dangerous currents of the wizarding world's politics. One of the clearest examples of this contrast unfolded during the turbulent events surrounding the fall and return of Lord Voldemort. Lucius, convinced of his own importance and secure in the belief that his wealth and name made him untouchable, placed himself in dangerous proximity to the Dark Lord's plans. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, he participated directly in the mission to retrieve the prophecy from the Department of Mysteries. His choice to involve himself in such a high-stakes operation was driven by the belief that he could deliver victory and secure Voldemort's favor. It was an act of ambition, but also of overconfidence, one that ended in humiliating failure when Harry Potter and his friends escaped with the prophecy destroyed. For Lucius, the aftermath was devastating. The loss of the prophecy earned Voldemort's wrath, and the once respected patriarch of the Malfoy family found himself in Azkaban. Here, Narcissa's strength became the family's anchor. Though she never openly defied Voldemort, her actions were deliberate and measured, aimed not at serving his cause but at safeguarding her family. Her approach was not about making bold moves in the public eye, it was about surviving the treacherous game without revealing her true loyalties. The difference in their temperaments can be seen in how each responded to danger. Lucius often assumed that his influence could shield him from consequences. Narcissa understood that in the new order Voldemort sought to create, loyalty was never truly rewarded, only usefulness. This understanding shaped her behavior when Voldemort installed himself in Malfoy Manor in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. While Lucius was visibly shaken, his composure cracked under the Dark Lord's casual humiliations, Narcissa maintained a quiet dignity. She adapted to the constant threat by saying little, watching everything, and calculating every word she spoke. Her most defining act of cold calculation came in the Forbidden Forest. When Voldemort, believing Harry to be dead, sent her to check his body, she had a choice: confirm the Dark Lord's victory and continue to serve his cause, or use the moment to secure her family's future. She asked Harry quietly, "Is Draco alive?" Upon hearing his affirmative answer, she lied to Voldemort, declaring Harry dead. This decision was not born from loyalty to Harry or to Dumbledore's cause, but from a single-minded focus on ensuring that her son survived the battle. Her ability to mask her intentions in such a critical moment was a skill Lucius never displayed. Lucius's pride often blinded him to the shifting balance of power, while Narcissa's clarity allowed her to recognize when an alliance was no longer safe. During the earlier years, Lucius had sought Voldemort's favor through displays of wealth, political influence, and a willingness to take risks in his service. But when Voldemort returned, the rules changed. Narcissa understood that proximity to such power could destroy them if they did not tread carefully. Her cool restraint kept her from volunteering for dangerous tasks, even when silence might have been interpreted as weakness. There is a telling moment during the meeting at Malfoy Manor when the Snatchers brought in Harry, Ron, and Hermione. Lucius, eager to redeem himself in Voldemort's eyes, pressed to confirm Harry's identity so that he could claim the reward of delivering him. Narcissa, however, did not rush forward. She observed, letting events unfold until she could determine the safest course. While Lucius saw the situation as a chance to regain standing, Narcissa saw the potential for disaster if they made a wrong move in Voldemort's volatile presence. Even in their marriage, this dynamic seemed consistent. Lucius was the face of the family's public dealings, a figurehead in the ministry and a prominent voice in the corridors of influence. Narcissa was the strategist behind the scenes, ensuring that their wealth and status were preserved regardless of political shifts. The Malfoy name carried weight, but it was Narcissa's careful maneuvering that ensured it did not become a target when the tides turned. She was not immune to fear, but she was adept at masking it, turning it into caution rather than recklessness. Her calculation also extended to alliances. While Lucius's loyalty to Voldemort seemed absolute in earlier years, Narcissa kept the family's network of influence intact with those who opposed him, never severing ties completely. This ensured that when Voldemort fell, the Malfoys could still find protection. Her decision to side with Harry in the forest, even briefly, was a masterstroke in shifting the family's alignment at the decisive moment, allowing them to survive the collapse of the Dark Lord's power without the vengeance of the victors falling on them. The books often frame Lucius as a man undone by his own arrogance, and this arrogance placed the Malfoy family under direct threat more than once. His decision to give Tom Riddle's diary to Ginny Weasley in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets was another impulsive move. Intended as a political strike against Arthur Weasley and a demonstration of his importance to Voldemort's cause, it instead exposed him to the wrath of the Ministry when the plot was uncovered. Narcissa, though not directly involved, surely recognized the danger of such schemes. It is telling that she never engaged in similar acts herself. In the wizarding world, survival often depended on knowing when to speak and when to remain silent. Narcissa mastered the art of saying only what needed to be said. Lucius, by contrast, often sought to impress, to remind others of his influence and connections. His words, meant to intimidate, sometimes revealed too much of his intent. Narcissa's restraint meant that her motives were harder to read, her true allegiances concealed even from those who believed they knew her. The balance between Lucius's impulsiveness and Narcissa's calculation was not always harmonious, but it was effective. He could take risks that, if successful, brought the family power and status. She could mitigate the damage when those risks failed. In a sense, their survival during Voldemort's second rise to power was the result of this unspoken partnership. Narcissa could not undo Lucius's mistakes, but she could ensure they did not destroy everything they had built. Her loyalty was never to Voldemort or to the ideals of blood purity as an abstract cause, it was to her family. This distinction gave her the flexibility to act in ways that served her husband and son, even if it meant defying the Dark Lord in subtle but decisive moments. Lucius's pride might have led him to ruin if left unchecked, but Narcissa's measured approach kept the Malfoys from being consumed entirely. In the end, it was Narcissa's calculated lie in the forest that allowed the Malfoys to walk away from the Battle of Hogwarts alive. That moment, simple in its delivery, but profound in its impact, revealed the essence of her strength. While Lucius had spent years chasing influence and recognition, she had quietly honed the one skill that mattered most in times of chaos, the ability to make the right choice at the right moment, regardless of the cost to appearances or pride. This contrast between husband and wife is one of the more intriguing dynamics in the Harry Potter series. It shows that survival in a dangerous world is not solely about power or wealth, but about knowing when to act, when to wait, and when to place the safety of loved ones above all else. Lucius's impulsiveness might have lit the fires of opportunity, but it was Narcissa's cold, deliberate calculation that ensured the family's survival when those fires threatened to burn out of control. Number 27. Quiet exit from politics. After the Battle of Hogwarts, when the dust had settled and the world was trying to piece itself together, Narcissa Malfoy made a decision that set her apart from almost every other surviving figure of the war. In those first months after Voldemort's fall, the wizarding world was a whirlwind of trials, public statements, and sudden reconciliations. Families like the Weasleys became more visible than ever, while former Death Eaters scrambled to repair their reputations. But Narcissa, whose pivotal act on the battlefield had saved Harry Potter's life, her whispered lie to the Dark Lord that he is dead, still echoing in history, took a different path. She did not fight to reclaim a public role. She did not push herself forward to explain, to justify, or even to ask forgiveness. She disappeared, quietly, deliberately, as if she had stepped out of a room and closed the door without making a sound. Her withdrawal was not an accident born of shame or exhaustion. It was a strategy. Narcissa understood better than most that the Malfoy name would never again carry the same power in the Ministry or the wizarding elite. The trials had spared Lucius from Azkaban largely because of the family's cooperation in the final hours of the war, but no one forgot his role in the years before. Draco, too, was a figure the public looked at with suspicion. Rumours of his role in the events at Hogwarts in 6th year never entirely faded. In such a climate, Narcissa saw no advantage in trying to stand in the light. Instead, she positioned herself as the guardian of the Malfoy family's private world, creating an invisible shield that kept unwanted eyes and ears at bay. This meant rejecting the path many others took. She did not attend the Ministry's annual Victory Day memorial. She did not sit for interviews in the Daily Prophet, nor did she write memoirs or sponsor charitable events to repair the family image. On the rare occasions she was seen in public, it was in controlled circumstances, a brief stop at Madame Malkin's, a single appearance at an exclusive dinner hosted by old acquaintances, like Astoria Greengrass's parents. Every move was calculated, every public step a reminder that Narcissa Malfoy was still present, but on her own terms. Her preference for private gatherings meant that even in the close-knit world of wizarding society, few could claim to know what she truly thought about the war or its aftermath. Within the high walls of Malfoy Manor, life took on a new rhythm. Narcissa became the quiet architect of the family's recovery, though not in the way the Ministry might have liked. She encouraged Lucius to reduce his political ties to almost nothing, steering him away from any involvement that could pull the Malfoy name back into controversy. When old allies reached out, seeking support for small, carefully hidden agendas, Narcissa was the one who advised silence. She refused to allow Draco to be drawn into Ministry projects designed to rehabilitate former associates of Voldemort, knowing that such work was more about optics than genuine reintegration. Her priority was not public forgiveness, it was safety. One telling example of her resolve came during an autumn banquet hosted by the Parkinson family. one of the few pure blood gatherings that survived the war's social rearrangements. The guest list included several ministry officials, among them Percy Weasley, now a prominent voice in post-war reconstruction. Narcissa arrived with Lucius and Draco, her presence turning heads immediately. The Parkinsons, eager to present a show of unity among the old families, attempted to draw her into a conversation about the ministry's efforts to restore trust. Narcissa listened politely, her gaze cool, and excused herself with a comment about family matters before any meaningful engagement could occur. To outsiders, it looked like an act of aloofness. To those who knew her, it was a carefully drawn line. She would not allow herself, or her family, to be cornered into declarations they could not control.